Hi everyone, and thank you so much for your interest in our work. My name is Giulia Barbareschi, and today I'm going to talk to you about our paper titled What Differences Make Conceptualization of Disability and Assistive Technology Among Kenyan Youth. The stigma that often surrounds disability, it's one of the most pervasive barriers that has huge negative impact on the lives of millions of people with disability worldwide. Various definitions of stigma formulated by scholars over the years clearly show that stigma is a social phenomenon that is determined by the context in which it manifests. In the last decade, several studies in HCI have started to investigate the impact that the use of assistive technologies has on the conceptualization of disability stigma. And none of these studies took place in the global south, where actually about 80% of people with disabilities in the world live. The conceptualization of disability in the global south can be significantly different from the global north, and moral models of disability that attribute the occurrence of disability to a curse are still highly prevalent in many regions. Due to the constant threat of poverty, many people see disability as a disastrous circumstance that prevents people from being able to enter the workforce and provide for themselves and their family. At the same time, community and family bonds tend to be stronger in the global south compared to the global north, which leads to people place actually less importance on concepts such as independence. Assistive technologies are often seen as essential, the only way really that one can hope to cope with the harsh challenges which are imposed by inaccessible environment. At the same time, assistive technology can also attract unwanted attentions to one's disability and become a source of stigma in itself. For the studies, we recruited 25 young Kenyans without disabilities between the age of 18 and 26 years, which were distributed around 5 different regions of Kenya. We organized a series of focus groups on WhatsApp according to the geographical location of participants. We collected transcripts of the focus groups and any media that was shared on these groups. Our findings show that when asked to describe people with disabilities, most young people used language that was charged with negative emotions, primarily pity and fear. People with disabilities were often described solely on the basis of their functional impairments as someone who could not do something, who could not see, could not walk or hear. However, when talking with young people about the specific barriers that people with disability face in their daily lives, what emerged is that youth really consider society largely responsible for most of them. The causes, for instance, of difficulties in entering education or employment were attributed to lack of opportunities, lack of assistive technologies, or inaccessible environments, never to lack of skills of the individual with disabilities. And finally, when asked about the opportunity of being involved romantically with a person with disabilities, most youth did not consider disability as a barrier to this, but the potential stigma of being sort of stigmatized by association was seen as the biggest deterrent. In relation to assistive technologies, young people exhibited a good knowledge of simple assistive technologies for mobility, but they were often confused by the purpose of less common ATs, such as hearing aids or braille books. Participants had some very rigid mental associations between the type of certain assistive technologies and the users. such as walking sticks being attributed exclusively to older people. Assistive technologies was often described as permanent in terms of use, and it was seen as really the only tool that could help to normalize one's capabilities. Young people had little interactions with assistive technologies in real life, and most of their knowledge was actually theoretical and based on either direct observation or what they have seen on videos or social media. Interestingly, assistive technologies were not seen as something that could attract stigma, but on the other hand, were seen as a sign that indicated that one had access to resources, mainly economical resources, but resources nonetheless that could help one to cope with difficulties associated with disabilities. And finally, many participants had unrealistic expectations concerning assistive technologies, which were seen as a sort of functional panacea that could completely erase the consequences of one impairment. Despite this, participants did not seem to have any particular awareness of the skills that it takes to actually use one's assistive technologies effectively. Finally, overall, our findings show that accessibility research in the Global South should focus on ways to highlight the capabilities of many people with disabilities, to break associations between disability and helplessness, and reframe the unrealistic expectations that there are around assistive technologies. We also really share the belief of our young participants when they stated that many of the barriers that people with disability face in their daily life in the Global South are created by mainstream society, which actually holds the power of changing the status quo and should be challenged by researchers to do so. We also suggest that increasing the emphasis on the use of mainstream devices by people with disabilities can help to break stereotypes that surround who should and shouldn't have access to them, and some of the rigid associations between medicalized assistive technologies and disabilities. Thanks so much for your attention.